Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Roerig. Hello, everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And today we are going to be talking about Renfield, the Dracula's Assistant movie that came out earlier this year. We are also going to be going over some things coming up on the horizon. We're going to be talking about some trailers that came out this week. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the Sag-Aftra WGA strike, because Sag-Aftra has joined the strike now for the first time since, I believe, 1960 that the two have struck at the same time. So we are going to be talking about that as well this week. Let's kick things off with our On the Horizon segment. On the Horizon. On the Horizon. On the Horizon is where we talk about what's coming up in the next week or so. We're going to be starting things off here with Futurama, which is returning on Hulu on Monday, July 24th. Now, the big thing about this was that initially they didn't have one of the cast members returning. There was a big hubbub about it. They ended up signing him back on, so Bender will be back.
John DiMaggio, yeah. He's returning. Honestly, I think that's critical. Bender.
Yeah, Bender is the heart of Futurama.
Yeah, you can't have Futurama without Bender. Bender, his voice is iconic. It just wouldn't be the same at all.
Yeah, we couldn't watch Futurama if we can't bite Bender's shiny metal ass.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So that is returning on Monday, July 24th on Hulu. Another animated series, Harley Quinn, is returning on Max on Thursday, July 27th. I'm a season behind on this, but it's actually a really good show. I just never got around to the last season, so I need to kind of work my way through that first.
Right.
Then Twisted Metal, another animated project. Well, not really. It's live action, but
animated,
it kind of should be.
Yeah.
It's cartoonish. How about that? Twisted Metal is coming.
It's a comedy.
Coming to Peacock on Thursday, July 27th as well. And then also on Thursday, July 27th, The Witcher is returning. It did a 2-part season that it dropped this time.
Netflix
so the second
loves doing that.
Yeah. So the second part is dropping on Thursday, July 27th on Netflix. Then the rest of these are for Friday, July 28th. It's a busy Friday. The Beanie Bubble is a movie coming to Apple TV Plus, stars Zach Galifianakis, and it's kind of the story about Beanie Babies. And that doesn't sound like you'd hear that and think like, oh, okay, whatever. Story about some niche product that was super popular. There's actually some pretty kind of weird, cultish, creepy stuff that went on with that. And the guy kind of grooming young girls that ran a business.
Yikes.
That I listened to a podcast about it like a while ago, and I was like, wow, there is all sorts of shit going on with that. And that is, it's actually kind of an interesting story, and it's coming to Apple TV Plus on Friday, July 28th. Then also on July 28th, as I said, the rest of these are all July 28th. Captain Fall, which is a new animated comedy. It's about a sea captain who gets caught up in a international smuggling operation. It includes the voices of John Ritter, Anthony Kerrigan, who we talked about last week just being cast in Superman Legacy, Christopher Maloney, who most people know from Law & Order Special Victims Unit, and Adam Devine, who is, he was just recently in the Outlaws movie on Netflix. That is coming on Friday, July 28th to Netflix. Good Omens 2 is coming on Friday, July 28th to Amazon Prime. I'm looking forward to this. Good Omens was great.
Yeah.
Great chemistry between the actors, and John Hamm is playing a much bigger role. He had kind of a pretty small part in the first season, and this one he's got a bigger part, it looks like. So that's going to be a fun watch. Hidden Strike. This is a movie coming to Netflix on Friday, July 28th. This is Jackie Chan and John Cena in an action movie.
All right.
Just a weird, just weird.
Yeah.
Weird pairing, but that's coming to Netflix on Friday, July 28th. I believe it was originally supposed to be a theatrical release, and then it got shuffled around, and now it's a Netflix original movie. The Expanse, a Telltale series, episode 1, is coming out on Friday, July 28th. The PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and PC. For some reason, missing the Switch. Not sure why. To their detriment. But yeah, The Expanse. This was announced a while ago. This was announced like a few years ago, wasn't it?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, so finally coming out, episode 1. And then Haunted Mansion, also on Friday, July 28th in movie theaters. That's the new Disney theme park attraction adaptation that was previously attempted with Eddie Murphy. This is the new one. Talk to Me. This is a new horror film from A24. It's about a supernatural hand that allows people to commune with the afterlife. It's kind of got like a little bit of a, God, what was that movie in the 80s with Kiefer Sutherland?
Well, what I gathered from the trailer, it's a little more intense than that. It looks like
Flatliners, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, Flatliners.
It looks has like kind of a Flatliners vibe to it.
It looks like from the trailer, they grab the hand and then they are possessed by the spirit. Mm-hmm. So it's not just simply like, oh, the spirit can communicate with them. The spirit like possesses them. And from what it looked like from the trailer or something, that act of getting possessed, they get hooked on it.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to say. It's very Flatliners-esque. Like, it has that same kind of vibe to it.
Yeah. And obviously, things tumble very much downhill from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other side wants to stay, basically.
Yes. Yes.
Friday, July 28th in theaters as well. That is it for On the Horizon. Now we're going to do our news segment on Beats. On Beat is where we talk about the week's news, and we have a few trailers to go over, and then we're going to dive headfirst into strike news. So let's start with the trailers. First, we got a trailer for Zom 100, Bucket List of the Dead. I just mentioned this to Will right before we did the podcast, that what's really interesting about this is that this is a manga adaptation, and there is an anime adaptation of this manga that's currently airing, like this season, like right now, new episodes are coming out. I think by the time the movie comes out, I think it's a movie, comes out, I think that it'll be over. Like the anime series will have already concluded. But it's just kind of interesting that people are watching this anime series right now. It's one of the big anime, one of the more popular anime of the current season. And then Netflix kind of just dropped the trailer for like a live action version of it.
It's so weird.
Right in the middle of that.
I was watching this. At first I was like, another zombie show. And I thought, oh, like, this is unique. Okay, this dude knows he's doomed and he's just going to just do the crap he wants to do in the middle of the apocalypse. I thought that's interesting. And then it literally becomes Super Sentai at the end. And I'm like, what? I'm like, okay.
It's like it starts off Walking Dead, and then it becomes literally the movie The Bucket List with Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
And then it becomes fucking Power Rangers.
Yeah. I'm like, what? All right.
If you're interested in the concept and you don't want to wait for the movie, as I said, there's like anime adaptation right now. I think it's on Crunchyroll or it might be on High Dive. I'm not sure, but you can look that up. Zom 100, Bucket List of the Dead. Then we got a trailer for The Creator. This is, I think, the second trailer for it. This much more involved trailer, kind of showing more of what's going on here, but it's kind of like an AI versus humans thing, that age-old story that we've seen countless versions of. But what we see, the war
between man and the machines raged on throughout the early 70s.
Yeah. But what's interesting here is that it's about the machines apparently built a device that was going to win them the war, and a human is sent to take that device from the machines, and so they could use it for the humans. That device turns out to be a robot child. So
yeah, it's
kind of like, looks like it's going to be taking kind of that Lone Wolf and Cub kind of approach that, like, you know, you'd get from something like The Mandalorian or anything with Pedro Pascal in it.
I was going to say, like, like very much Mandalorian vibes here.
Yeah, I mean, well,
this is like Mandalorian
vibe.
This is like Mandalorian meets the Terminator.
There's a famous manga series, a really old manga series.
Yeah, Lone Wolf and Cub. Yeah.
Yeah, and now that's like a genre.
Yes.
And Pedro Pascal's kind of the master of that genre.
you could
between
tell
The Last of Us and
you could tell like the Mandalorian cribs heavily from Lone Wolf and Cub. Like,
yeah, which works because, I mean, if you're gonna make like a Star Wars adaptation that makes sense, then you got to rip off a Japanese property because that's what the original Star Wars did. Star Wars was the Hidden Fortress, you know?
Yeah, right. Well, Star Wars had like a lot of inspirations.
Yeah,
not just,
Flash Gordon, other stuff
Flash
like that.
Gordon, yeah, stuff like that.
A lot of pulpy stuff from the 70s and 60s, and a lot of like post World War II pulp sci-fi.
Yes,
and then Akira Kurosawa.
And Akira Kurosawa, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But anyways, the creator is like a robots versus humanity Lone Wolf and Cub story.
Yes.
So yeah, and it looks pretty interesting. So I think that's Denzel Washington's son in the lead there. He was also in Tenet, the Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah,
Tenet,
he was.
Tenet,
yeah.
not Tenant.
That's
Tenet. That was Christopher Nolan's story about a guy living in an apartment.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not about somebody renting an apartment.
Next up, we have A Haunting in Venice. This is the new Poirot movie, the new Agatha Christie adaptation. What's interesting here, and Will and I talked about this again before the podcast, is that they're kind of playing it up like it's a supernatural story, but we know it's not. That's not what these novels are. These novels are more in line. You referenced the Hound of, what is it? The Sherlock Holmes one, the Hound of the Baskerville, or?
Yeah.
As it being like that, I referenced Scooby-Doo. In that it's like, it's supernatural, but there's actually like a human doing something that's behind it all, you know?
Right,
and,
yeah, exactly.
That's the next one coming up. I think there have been 2 movies so far. It was, Murder on the Nile and
The Orient Express.
Yeah.
Was the first one. Murder on the Nile was the second. This is the third.
Yeah. So it's the next one in that franchise, you know. It's kind of interesting that we're getting more stuff like that now. Because we don't just have that, but then we have like the Knives Out series or franchise that's kind of that kind of story as well. And then Rian Johnson, who did Knives Out, also did the TV series for Peacock, Poker Face, which is kind of like a whodunit kind of thing too. So we're kind of getting more of those kind of murder mystery type stories back. So that's kind of interesting. And then lastly, we got a trailer for Nandor Fodor and the Talking Mongoose, starring Simon Pegg, Christopher Lloyd, and the voice of Neil Gaiman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks interesting. It looks very quirky.
Suitably weird and
suitably weird
and delightful.
Yes.
Small, like, British village with, weird happenings and interesting, quirky characters. Yeah, it looks like it'll be a fun
very,
movie.
skeptical, Simon Pegg getting sucked in deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Looks like it'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It looks very fun. Looking forward to it.
That's it for our trailers, but it's not it for our news, because the main topic of our news is that Sag-Aftra, that is the Screen Actors Guild and American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. It's 2 separate unions that merged several years ago. They have joined the WGA strike against the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Pictures and Television Producers. This is basically the big CEOs of the big media companies, like David Zaslav of Warner and Reed Hastings of Netflix and Bob Iger of Disney. That's like kind of what the AMPTP is. So the strike has picked up significantly. The writers strike quite often, almost always, every time they get kind of screwed over and end up striking, almost every time their contracts go up. WGA doesn't strike as often, and I think this is the first time since 1960 that both unions have striked simultaneously. So yeah, I mean, that's big. The 2008 WGA strike, which when people think about the Hollywood strike, that's the one I think most people nowadays would think about, that's the one that gave us shorter seasons of Lost and Breaking Bad and stuff that everybody remembers in recent memory. That caused $2 billion in losses for the industry. So that's the estimated losses for the industry. Yeah, this is going to be big because it was already going to be big with just SAG strike, or with just WGA striking. But with Sag-Aftra joining in, it's like, wow, this is like a big deal strike now. Hopefully this actually expedites the strike, because I'm really hoping the AMPTP end up kind of caving to most of the demands of Sag-Aftra and the WGA because, AMPTP are kind of acting like mustache trolling villains right now.
They really are. They're being
There's some stuff that's like straight up evil sounding. Like, for example, an unnamed AMPTP member is accused of advocating for pushing union members to homelessness. That's dirty. There's a great, did you see Ron Perlman's take on that?
I saw. I'm 100% with them. A lot of people are like, oh man, Ron Perlman shouldn't be. Oh, F that. F that. These people are assholes. They deserve everything that's coming to them.
So it's like, it's already like evil comments like that. But then you also just have just straight pettiness. Like Universal cut the trees outside of their offices where people were picketing. They literally just cut the trees so there's no shade. Now to understand that, this strike is in Los Angeles. Right now in Los Angeles, I live just north of Los Angeles. We're in the hundreds, 100-degree plus temperatures right now in LA. It's a heat wave and summer colliding at the same time. It's fucking hot. These people are out on strike. They're picketing for hours and hours, and they had shade from those trees, and Universal went, well, let's just get rid of that shade.
I just saw a Discussing Film tweet that Netflix announced they are upping their free cash flow estimate to $5 billion plus for the full year, while still refusing to pay actors and writers fairly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very just mustache trolley behavior from the AMPTP. I think they're very out of touch. It's getting lots of interesting information is coming out because of this. Somebody leaked out the wages for the major CEOs of the AMPTP. Number one being David Zaslav, who we've talked about frequently on this podcast and our disdain for him, of Warner Brothers Discovery. This year, or I believe it's this year, is making $498.9 million.
Oh, yeah.
Absurd. Just absurd. I mean, he's like way out ahead of like, as far as this top 10 list of AMPTP wages, he's way, way out in the front there with such an absurd amount. But even if you go all the way down to the 10th place, which is Patrick Whitesell of Endeavor, which is a name that, we have our audience and us as well are interested not just in movies, but in video games. And if you're interested in both of those, you're going to know the name Endeavor and their recent buying habits.
It's funny because of this. Famous stories of Hollywood accounting are coming out.
Yep.
Like when the studio that produced My Big Fat Greek Wedding claimed that the film lost $20 million when the movie cost $6 million to make and earned over $350 million at the box office.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the AMPTP isn't really paying attention to the fact that the era that we live in now is kind of like a free flow of information era. And so these little dirty secrets that they were able to keep before, when you're putting yourself in the spotlight, those things are going to start coming out now in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have come out before.
Oh, yeah.
So there's all sorts of stuff coming out.
Peter Jackson had to actually sue Warner Brothers for his share of residuals because the studio told him that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was unprofitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very believable.
Yeah.
Hollywood accounting has always been like a big issue, and now it's kind of, the details are coming out from it. Besides even just the Hollywood accounting, we're getting stuff like, there was an actress from Orange is the New Black that showed one of her residual checks, and you see it's got something like, 20 episodes of Orange is the New Black listed as like what's paying her residuals, and she goes down, and it's like less than $1.
Yeah.
She's getting paid for it, and it's absurd. And then that is accompanied by them saying, listen, these aren't just residuals that we're getting paid later. Like, we didn't get paid much from the get-go. The residuals was the reason to sign on to a project, because it's like, okay, we're not getting much up front, but we'll get money down the line as it continues to accrue money.
Yeah.
And they're saying like people talk about, as bartenders, keeping day jobs.
People talk about, like residuals, like paying for actors like rent and living expenses between projects, but that was under the old model, under cable and network television, and now we've moved to streaming, and they've completely rewrote the rules around streaming to where like they don't have to pay out as much as they used to.
So what's interesting is that the WGA and SAG co-strike of 1960 was like the creation of residuals as we know them. Like when we talk about residuals, that's where that came from, was from that strike. It was a demand for those residuals, and that became like the way for working actors to survive in the industry was through residuals. That happened in 1960. Every strike since has basically been in some way or another about residuals and the changing market and the way residuals have to change as well with that. In the 1960 strike, Ronald Reagan was the president of Sag-Aftra, or SAG at the time.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. The residuals also were an issue in the 1980 SAG strike, and that was about VHS. So when VHS came out and they were trying to go like, oh, okay, well, we don't even really know if this whole videotape market's going to take off. So
yeah,
we can't promise you profit shares of, it's like, that's, and if that sounds familiar, that's exactly what happened in the 2008 WGA strike when streaming was relatively new.
Yeah, every time.
They're like, we don't know about this whole internet thing.
Every time there's new media, the studios, they try to rewrite the rules to not have to pay actors as much as they used to. They see it as opportunity, say, okay, well, now we can write a contract that benefits us more.
Yeah, and this strike is actually interesting because it's not about like a new form of media that's changing the residual game. That was the 2008 strike. This one is basically about the collapse of an old means of residuals. So this is basically about the cable becoming obsolete.
This is also about the rise of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's a second issue that's kind of sprung up in this too.
Yeah, because what's coming out about this is the idea that studios want to start scanning actors.
Background actors, yeah, like extras.
Extras. And they want to be able to use them as AI actors, like
in perpetuity,
in perpetuity for free without any of those people's like consent.
Yeah, basically they pay them for the 1 day's appearance as a background actor, which is like a tiny amount of money. It's like $30 or something for like 1 day's acting as a background actor, and then they're just own your likeness in perpetuity.
And then they could reuse that likeness and never have to pay residuals to that individual or anything for that reuse.
Yeah, which not only is it just bad for background actors who aren't going to be getting money and who are going to have their image used in whatever the studio wants without any of their consent, but it's also going to hinder their ability to become actors. And one of the things, like foreground actors, I should say, one of the things that has been pointed out about this is Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who used to work as background actors. They did, for example, in Field of Dreams. They were in some of they were fans in the baseball stadium in that movie. Now they're like huge Hollywood A-listers, but that would have been an issue if this was something that happened in the past, because the studio would own the rights to their likeness and they'd be able to use that however they please to make it look like, oh yeah, Matt Damon endorses this, or Ben Affleck is part of this movie even though he's not really, And the idea that could happen to like a big A-lister like Matt Damon or Ben Affleck just seems preposterous. And unless you look back and go, actually, that very well could have happened if that tech had existed when they were background actors on Field of Dreams.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it's kind of a scary thought. My position on AI, I think, is that you cannot limit the development of the technology because somebody's going to do it. And if everybody's not working on it, then you're going to have like a deficit of competition in that field and somebody's going to completely dominate it. So if we set laws in the United States that limits that, China's going to go, well, fuck you, we do what we want, and they're going to develop it. And then that's going to be outsourced to China. And then there's going to be no income coming into the U.S. markets for that, into those fields. So you can't limit the technology. You have to limit its usages through laws, like you have to say, not that the technology can't be developed, but that you can't use it in a certain way to stop projects from doing that, to morally bankrupt ideas like this one we mentioned about for background actors has to be kind of like held at bay. Without limiting the actual development of the technology, which would cause a problem if you did that. That would be Ludditism, which never works.
That's basically where we're currently at. The hope is that the studios come back to the negotiating table and they agree upon a fair deal that benefits both writers and actors far more.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I think they're in a pretty good position now that Sag-Aftra's joined.
Yes, they are.
Because Hollywood's just shut down now. We're getting one of the first casualties of that right now, which is Comic-Con is just starting up.
Yes, and Comic-Con's not going to have any promotion whatsoever because the actor's not allowed to promote their product, their projects.
Exactly.
So yeah, we're going to see that. That's going to be an issue. It's also going to be an issue for network television going into the fall because the fall TV programs were supposed to begin filming. They're not going to be able to film.
That's the tricky thing about these strikes is that they take a while to take effect because stuff is filmed way in advance, you know?
Yeah.
And so we don't see the effects of it. So this writer's strike happened a while ago, but we've been getting a steady flow of content that's been written by those writers. Like, we've just been getting a steady flow while the strike's going on. So I think for a lot of people at home that are missing out on, like, they don't notice it because nothing's really happening yet. The only stuff that's really happening is like, oh, Saturday Night Live's not on. Last Week Tonight's not on. You know, things like that. It's like, but in general, scripted content we're still getting it.
Yeah.
But come the fall season, you know, there's nothing. And this is going to be a bad time for there to be nothing because the whole kind of cable and broadcast spectrums of television are just kind of dying right now anyways. Oh, yeah. And to have that happen now, it's like, ooh, this is like maybe Last Snail territory.
I think you're going to see a lot of ABC rerunning shows from Disney Plus and Peacock rerunning stuff from NBC rerunning stuff from Peacock, you know. Like,
not just that, but like there's going to be a lot of stuff, like you're going to see a lot of Canadian shows that are being like brought over because they just don't have anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, when I was putting together this week's I saw quite a few Canadian shows on there.
I saw a comment saying that like Netflix is in a better position than the other studios because they import a lot of their content. Like we just talked about a show coming to Netflix that is an import, you know, the zombie show. Mm-hmm. And obviously like Squid Game was one of their biggest hits.
It is their biggest hit, yeah.
Yeah, and those things are not affected by the strike. So they got that. I don't know if, like, the others are going to try that strategy or, you know, what's going to happen here.
Well, it's like I said, when I was putting together our list for On the Horizon, there were a lot of Canadian shows on there already.
Yeah.
So they're already doing that. They're already doing the, like, let's import shows from Canada. Basically, broadcasters are doing the, I have a girlfriend, but she lives in Canada thing right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of Canadian shows. You're going to be wondering, why is everything in Canada now? You know, well, now you know why. It's because of the strike, and you're going to be having issues with this. We've also heard, you mentioned ABC as like just kind of an example of like, oh, ABC will be airing stuff from like Disney Plus or something.
Oh yeah, you know what I was thinking about.
Bob Iger has straight up said that they're now considering dumping ABC as a Disney product.
Yes.
They would just flat out get rid of it. So, as I mentioned, the idea of broadcast and cable are kind of dying right now.
Yeah, because linear
already.
Television is not as profitable as it used to be.
Everything's streaming now.
And Bob Iger is trying to focus on profits.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thinking behind that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just a weird time. It's why the strike is really popping off right now is because of the concerns of the failure of broadcast and cable is going to completely deplete residuals in one area for actors and writers. And that's a huge issue, you know, because they're not going to be able to live well and because streaming doesn't pay residuals in the same way. I actually saw a streamer, it's Hassan Piker. He's like a very like leftist or I guess liberal streamer, and he was talking about what they do for Twitch and YouTube, where it's a similar area because what pays for the residuals, the way residuals keep coming in is because of advertising. Because when stuff is rerun on television, there's advertisements on that, and that's a clear revenue stream that can then be divided up. And a lot of the arguments that the producers group, the AMPTP, is making against high residuals on streaming is that there is no constant flow like that. There's just a subscription rate. And how do we possibly divide up the subscription rate for an entire platform to each person in a show or something? And they've argued that case. The precedent there has already been set though. It's been set by Twitch and YouTube, which Twitch and YouTube both have like premium options where you don't have to watch ads. And they actually cut a percentage to their content creators for those streamers that aren't going to be watching ads. So there's a precedent already set for like how they can do residuals. So it's kind of interesting that Twitch is Amazon, obviously, and YouTube is Google. So these two other major corporations, like international, multi-billion-dollar corporations, might be the thorn in the side of the AMPTP and these old Hollywood institutions, these old rich Hollywood institutions. So that's going to be kind of interesting to see if that ends up playing a part in the way this strike is eventually resolved.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But that's it for Strike Talk.
Yes.
Let's move on to our main topic of this episode, full spoilers. So, this week on Full Spoilers, we are going to be talking about the movie Renfield. Renfield is directed by Chris McKay, who did the Lego Batman movie. It's written by Ryan Ridley of Rick and Morty and Ava Tramer of Angie Tribeca. It's based on a short story by Robert Kirkman of The Walking Dead and inspired, of course, by characters from Dracula, written by Bram Stoker.
Yes, it is a very gonzo take on the material.
Yeah.
I was watching this is probably like the first action horror comedy I've ever seen. Not a genre mashup you see often.
Yeah.
Although I guess Army of Darkness can be considered action horror comedy as well.
Yeah. Maybe even less on the horror, actually, surprisingly, considering the roots of Army of Darkness, but less horror than is in Renfield, yeah.
But this is, I think this still fits horror because there is plenty of blood and gore in this movie. This movie does not shy away from being gory at all.
It's interesting, though, because it's the whole thing is very obviously, with no subtlety at all, is an allegory to toxic relationships.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And it makes it actually really interesting. There's no subtlety to that at all. It's straight up spelled out. But it works. Like, it makes the movie, and it doesn't just, like, ground it in this kind of perspective that makes more sense with today, but it's like, it works. It's funny. It adds a lot of humor to it. The whole therapy angle adds humor to it. I remember the part where Renfield is talking to Dracula, and Dracula's in his apartment, and he's kind of threatening him, and Renfield starts fighting back, like holding up his self-help book, and he's using like therapy terms, and Dracula just looks kind of confused.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's hilarious. Who put these ideas in your head? And then he murders his whole therapy group.
Yeah, the people that put that in his head. So yeah, I think the main thing I have to say about this movie is that I think there's like almost no wasted time.
No,
like,
it's
the movie
very
is
much
very
like
economical about its time, about making sure stuff moves.
Like stuff moves probably too fast in this movie. This movie is like afraid, like it's going to run out of time before it like gets everything it wants to do in there. Like,
yeah, there are like several characters that it's like, yeah, they could probably use a little bit more development, but then you think about it and it's like, yeah, but I think that development would hurt the pacing. So they kind of made a choice. They made a choice to kind of go like, you know what? Yes, this character could use more development, but fuck it. We're trying to get the pacing right, you know? And it's so economically paced that it reminds me almost of like a movie from the 80s, you know?
Yes.
We talk about movies from the 80s, like Back to the Future is a perfect example of a movie that's like so economical with its time. There's just not a wasted second of that movie. And I think like that's one thing you can give, if nothing else, to Renfield. And I think there's more you can give to Renfield. But if nothing else, you could give that it's very economical with its time. It's paced very quickly.
Oh yeah, it's just boom, 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 you know? Like get to one thing and get to the next thing. Yeah, it doesn't waste any time. There's no downtime where, like, nothing's happening.
Yeah, even where there's exposition, it's kind of snappy and it's quick and it's tied in with narration, with, like, quick edits, split screens sometimes even, ways to kind of, like, move everything along quickly. So, like, they don't want to dwell on something because they need to keep moving, and so they found ways to get that paced so that it just keeps firing on all cylinders. I like how they did some of Renfield's backstory with Dracula, like in that kind of black and white old like movie look, you know, the old Universal.
They made it look as much like the original Dracula film as possible. Mm-hmm. The Universal version, I mean.
Yeah, I mean Nicolas Cage's like costuming as Dracula is similar too, and
his costuming is the Bela Lugosi costuming. Like That was a neat gimmick, I thought.
Yeah, it made it play well. That worked really well, I think. I think all the actors in it are great. I mean, Nicholas Hoult as
Nicolas
Renfield
Cage
is charming and funny and perfectly plays off the insecurities. Nicolas Cage, of course, just gets to ham it up. He just gets to put the dial to 11.
Oh yeah, they clearly like said, just be Nicolas Cage. Just do the thing you do and get out of his way. And he just went to town.
He just eats the scenery, you know?
Yes.
And he just takes it all. Awkwafina is great as Rebecca, the lead female character. She's strong. She just keeps moving. She has a personality, but they don't they don't spend too much time going like, oh, but this is why she's like this or that's. Like they don't
overwhelm the film with
what they need to do with her. Yeah.
Yeah, with details.
They brought in Ben Schwartz as kind of a foil to Renfield.
Yes, Ben Schwartz, which is funny because they acknowledge at the end, Ben Schwartz is kind of yin to your yang, and Renfield's like, I barely even interacted with you.
I think Ben Schwartz is like a perfect pick for that kind of role.
Yes.
Because he takes up so much more room than he actually encompasses, you know? And he's just like, he takes up the scenery. He spreads out his arms and he walks the walk and he just eats up everything he needs to, draws as much attention to him as he can with as little as he has to do that with. And so he's like perfect for this kind of role to kind of just go like, look at me, I'm a villain, I'm, the foil to his character and stuff, even though he's such like if you actually calculate his screen time and his actual importance to the story, he's so tiny.
Although like technically like he's right, because like his story does have like a lot of similar beats. Like he does have like the same kind of toxic relationship with his mother, that Renfield has with Dracula. I think there's a part of him that, he just wants to be recognized for being him. But his problem is like he just embraces being awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had several parts where like Dracula was talking to him and he's all, tell me, would you like it if your organization was able to behead your rivals and, make everybody who opposes you cower in fear or be impaled on spikes? And he's like, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, that's
like
what
our whole thing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Ben Schwartz was great. And they had I talked to his mother. His mother was the actress from The Expanse.
Yeah, she was also in, I think, the best season of 24, in my opinion.
Yes, she was in the best season of 24. I don't remember her name, but yeah.
I got her name written here. I am not even going to try to pronounce that because I'm going to fuck it up so bad. She's one of the most iconic voices, though.
Yes.
All you have to do is hear her voice to know exactly who we're talking about. It's such an iconic voice. And yeah, she, again, perfect for this kind of role. Tiny role. Like, you could imagine her role being much bigger. And it's not, because the movie's so economical at its time. Her role itself is so small, she's barely on screen in this movie. But yeah, it is like you said, it's a good foil for Renfield with the toxic relationship, a comparison between Dracula and her. Despite her and her son having such little screen time, they do fit that role and they play their part. And I think the casting people who are iconic and memorable in their roles to play in such small roles that are also important roles is like a good tact. You want somebody that's going to stand out for the little time they're in it, and that's what works. So
yeah, no, I thought it was a fun movie. It's one of those movies that, because they're so accurate, it feels like it goes quick. It feels like it goes by really fast. Cause you're just like, from one plot point, one set piece to the next.
There's lots of little memorable moments, and it soars through so that you don't, you never feel like you're really bored. It just keeps going. And you get these little memorable moments that kind of stick out as well that are really fun. Lots of pretty fun gore scenes.
Yeah, lots of it. They filled the movie generously with these action set pieces that are full of gore. That's sort of
I think the apartment complex fight might be the best.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Renfield rips off one guy's arms and just starts beating a bunch of other people with them.
And then uses them as spears.
As spears, to impale two other guys. He rips that one guy's face off.
Yeah, through his mask.
Yeah, through his mask. Damn. That's the thing. Yeah, this has action movie set pieces, but they're incredibly gory in ways an action movie doesn't get gory. This does. That's a horror element.
Great when Renfield jumps on that one guy who was attacking Rebecca at the moment, and it's going in slow motion as he's crushing his body down towards all these other bodies, and he just kind of waves at her, and she just kind of waves back in a okay. I love that scene. I love that.
Oh yeah, that's great.
That whole action scene was great, but that moment in particular was really good. Yeah, just lots of good stuff. Good color grading too. Like visually, the movie is really striking. It's got this very like kind of green, red, and maybe like a little bit of purple, kind of like really accented colors.
Yes.
That really shine through. Like everything's kind of got this green tinge to it, which kind of gives it that old like Universal monster look. And not by the way the movies, because the movies were black and white, but like if you saw the posters for the old Universal, everything was kind of like got like greens in it, you know? Heavy use of greens in those posters and the promotional materials for those movies. And then like lots of red with the blood, but just in general, there's like neon reds and stuff from signs. And it's just really well color graded, has a really poppy look to it. It's based, I said, on a short story by Robert Kirkman. It kind of looks like it could be based on a comic book because it has a very comic booky look to it because of those colors, you know? But apparently it's just a short story and not like an actual comic book from Kirkman. But just interesting. I really thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I think it's just a fun action horror comedy romp that just paces at a mile a minute and it just goes through quickly and come out the other end, and it was a fun movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the kind of thing where you just hope there's not a sequel because I loved it, but this is the epitome of a good standalone movie, you know?
Oh,
so
yeah.
I hope they don't try to force a sequel on
No, Jesus. I got to the end of this. I'm like, okay, yeah, this definitely does not need a sequel for any reason.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I hope they don't do that.
But I guess that's pretty much it for our discussion of Renfield. Next week, we're not exactly 100% sure what we're going to be talking about next week because there's a few things coming up, and based on what ends up happening, what we talk about could change a little bit. So to give you a quick rundown, next week, the last 3 episodes of Secret Invasion will all be up. If there isn't too much else to talk about, that's what we're going to be talking about as our main topic next week. But right now is just kind of the kickoff of Comic-Con. It's like the pre-night is tonight, I believe. It's either tonight or tomorrow is the preview night before the official Comic-Con nights start. So if a lot of news ends up coming out of Comic-Con, that's what we're going to be covering next week, and we might not have enough time for Secret Invasion. As we mentioned with our Strike Talk, though, who knows what's going to be coming out of Comic-Con? There could be very little worth talking about coming out of Comic-Con. So we're going to have to see what transpires there to see if we're talking about that. We also have the Mario Kart 8 DLC, the Wave 5 of the DLC that we're going to be talking about at some point as well. And so those 3 things are kind of in shuffle about what we're going to be talking about next week. Depending on how much there is with the Comic-Con stuff, we'll figure out what else we can fit in. And we might end up talking about all 3 of those next week. We might only be talking about Comic-Con, but we'll figure that out when we get to it. But that's for next week. And until then, thank you everybody for listening. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our website, thetotalscreen.com. If you go to our website and click on any of the container stories for any of the episodes of our podcast, you will find all of the relevant links to our SoundCloud page, the RSS feed, everything else that you might need to acquire this podcast. So check that out. You can also subscribe to our podcast by going to your favorite podcast client of choice, like Pocket Cast or Apple Podcast. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel, as well as other content, our entire old podcast that went for 300 episodes. That's all up there as well. You can watch our Hannibal reactions, Game of Thrones reactions, all sorts of old stuff that's up there you can check out when you're checking out the podcast. So check out anything you want there. Thank you everybody for listening. Night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.